Welcome to The Long and the Short, a show where you can expect an honest take on trading, something you won't hear elsewhere. I'm your host, Sandeep Rao. Let's say you built a trading strategy. You backtest it and see a beautiful equity curve, smooth, steadily climbing everything you ever wanted. You've also tested it, you trust it, and you go live with it. And then the drawdown hits, deeper than anything your backtest told you. And it lasts longer than you thought it should. Now, the strategy hasn't changed, so what went wrong? Here's the interesting part. The backtest gave us one equity curve, one sequence of trades in one particular order that happened to play out in the past. A good chunk of how smooth it looked was simply luck. The market played those trades in that order. If the very same trades had happened in a different order, the worst drawdown could actually look very different. Most traders don't realize that their backtest is just one roll of the dice. But in practice, we treat it like a possible destiny. So how do we deal with this problem? How do we see all other lives our strategy could have lived? All other equity curves our strategy could have produced? Well, the answer goes back to the year 1946 to a Polish mathematician named Stanislaw Ulam, lying in a hospital bed recovering from a serious illness, passing the time playing a game of solitaire. Now, some of you may be wondering what a sick man playing cards has to do with our trading drawdowns, or for that matter, building of the atomic bomb, and why an Italian physicist had figured out the very same idea more than a decade earlier, told almost no one, and perhaps let it fade. We'll get to all of that in a while. That idea Stanislaw Ulam had over his deck of cards came to be known as the Monte Carlo method. And I would say it's one of the most powerful and most underused tools a trader has for understanding what our strategy might actually do. Today we are going to understand the method Ulam invented and if it can realistically be used to stress test our strategies. Without further ado, let's dive in. As always, let's first understand what this Monte Carlo simulation is all about. Say you have a strategy that took 100 trades over the last year. Some won, some lost. If you line them up in the order they happened, add the wins and losses as you go, you get the equity curve. That one climbing line we started with. It usually looks like this. Now here's an interesting question worth asking. Why does the line look the way it does? And that's because those 100 trades happened in a very specific order. This win, then 2 losses, then a run of wins. That exact sequence is what drew the shape of the equity curve. And that sequence happened because the way the market played out. Now we didn't choose it, it was to a large extent just plain luck. So Ulam's idea, the one he had over his deck of cards, was very simple. Take those same 100 trades, don't change a single one, same wins, same losses, nothing added, nothing removed, just sequence them in a different order and look at the curves that we get. Then do it again and again, 10,000 times perhaps. Each shuffle is like a new life our strategy could have lived. Same trades, same edge, a different ride, a different equity curve. Because we never added or removed a trade, each one of those, say, 10,000 curves would finish at the same point. The destination obviously wouldn't change, but the road to get there can get wildly different. One shuffle and it may give you a very tolerable drawdown. Spread it apart or clump the trades together and it may give us a drawdown deep enough to make us close the account and walk away, even though the strategy was technically exactly the same. That's what Monte Carlo shows us. The many possible paths that our strategy can possibly take. So yes, that's the meta, but how is it calculated? What are the inputs and the methods? So the inputs are the returns of each trade. It's simple. Let's say you have 100 trades for a given strategy over a period of, let's say, 1 year, then all the outcomes of those 100 trades are your inputs. Now coming to methods, when you want to figure out different paths which a strategy can take other than the one which we had from history, which is the backtest, then there are 2 methods of figuring those paths. The first method does not change the end outcome, it only changes the sequence of trades. So what we do is we take those 100 trades and juggle them in as many ways possible. So So as you can see, because the trades are exactly the same as what was there in the original backtest, the outcome cannot change, but the shape of the curve would change for sure. And hence this method is called the reshuffle method. Now there's another approach which is perhaps more useful for our context in trading. And in this method, what we do is we consider all the trades, the 100 trades that we were talking about, as a bank of possible trades. And then we pick up one trade at a time from the bank randomly and create an equity curve. And when I say we pick one trade, it means it's like taking the card out of the box and putting it back. So it's quite possible that we get the same trades over and over again. That's one possibility. And that would mean that the end outcome cannot remain the same. And this approach to visualizing a different sequence of trades is called bootstrapping. So the inputs are our trades and the two methods are reshuffling and bootstrapping. So what I'll do right now is I'll take a 2-year backtest, a real backtest of a 0DT 920 straddle strategy and show you the outcomes in 3 different ways. What you see here is an equity curve for a 0DT 920 straddle for the past 2 years on Nifty, and it's normalized to 100. It's simple and we all understand this. Now what you see on the screen is a representative chart of how the different equity charts will look like if we follow the reshuffle method. Now the reason I call it a representative chart is because 10 different outcomes do not in reality show all the possibilities or most of the possibilities in terms of percentile. If we really want to include most of the possibilities, we may have to scale this to thousands of lines and it may not be visibly legible. But mathematically it obviously makes sense to do that. Now the third one is a representation of the bootstrap method where, as you can see, the ends are different. The beginning is the same but the ends are completely different, and that increases the range of possibilities from 106 on the downside to 168 on the upside. So the next logical question is when to use which sampling method? Well, the reshuffling method is simple and widely used in manufacturing, drug testing, sports, you name it. And it works well when each outcome is largely independent of the ones around it. In trading, we usually lean on the bootstrap family of methods instead. Partly because it answers the bigger question, that is, what are the different range of possibilities that the strategy could produce? And also because trading data has a peculiarity. Trades aren't often independent. Wins and losses come in clusters, and that's what pushes us towards variants like the block bootstrap method, which are built to keep that feature intact, though the mechanics of that are beyond the scope of this video. So understanding the data at hand is key, how independent the outcomes are and picking the method that works best for it. In short, I would say that in the context of trading and investing, running a Monte Carlo simulation helps in understanding the possibilities of outcomes and the robustness of the strategy itself. It tells us if the backtest happened to play out just at the right time, and perhaps the future may not look anything similar. So by now we have some idea of what the Monte Carlo method is and how it's applicable in the context of trading and investing. But the real interesting stuff is how it was discovered, and that's quite a story by itself. So the year is early 1930s, the place is Rome, and the man at the center of it is Enrico Fermi, the Italian physicist you'll recognize from Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, played by Danny DeFerrari. In his lab at the University of Rome, he and his small team were firing these tiny chargeless particles at one element after another, watching what came back. They stumbled onto something strange: slow the neutrons down and let them bounce around first, and the effect got dramatically stronger. But that bouncing around was the hard part. A neutron doesn't travel in a straight line. It hits something, changes direction, loses a little energy, hits something else, a drunken walk through matter, every step decided by chance. If you wanted to predict how a whole crowd of neutrons would spread out, the mathematics was quite tough. There was no clean equation to measure the paths. In other words, the paths were just too tangled. So Fermi imagined following a single neutron, and at each step he let chance decide. How far until the next collision? Roll for it. Which direction? Roll again. How much energy lost? Roll again. He traced that one neuron's whole life from the start to finish and do it for another and another, and out of those individual random histories, the behavior of the whole crowd would emerge. Almost exactly what we discussed in the context of our trades. The equation didn't have a name to it yet, it was just a method that Fermi had discovered to solve a specific problem he was dealing with in his lab. The next leg of the story takes us across the Atlantic to Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the team working on the Manhattan Project was stationed. The year was around 1946. A Polish physicist by the name Stanislaw Ulam was a part of Fermi's team, and he was on a medical leave. And yes, by now, most of the greatest of the scientific minds of that era were working on the deadly Manhattan Project. So Ulam, while recovering in the hospital, was playing a game of solitaire, dealing out hand after hand. But being a mathematician, a question crept into his mind. What are the chances that a game of solitaire dealt out at random can be won at all? His first instinct was one any mathematician would have. That is to work it out properly, with combinatorics, with probability theory, pen on paper. And he did try. And he quickly ran into a wall. The number of ways 52 cards can fall is so vast and so hopelessly tangled that a clean calculation was essentially impossible. And at that moment, instead of pushing harder at the equation, Ulam flipped the problem on its head. He thought, why not just lay the game out, say 100 times, count how many times it comes out and divide. In other words, play the game and solve it. While it sounds simple, manually doing it is quite hard. So Ulam took the idea to his friend John von Neumann, the Hungarian mathematician and physicist who was also at that time part of the Manhattan Project. Von Neumann was also deep in the workings of a new computer at that time called ENIAC. When Ulam took the problem to von Neumann, he could see its use instantly. He understood at once that this simple counting trick could be used on the neutron problem, and he worked out how to actually make the ENIAC machine do the calculation. What had been Ulam's side quest became a real method running on real hardware aimed at the bomb though. It was another colleague, Nicholas Metropolis, a Greek-American physicist, who would help give the method its name. He pointed out that the whole method ran on chance and randomness, on odds, a bit like gambling. And Ulam, as it happened, had an uncle who could never resist the tables, who would disappear off to the famous casino town of Monte Carlo in Monaco for months together. So that's how this whole idea of Monte Carlo simulation or Monte Carlo methods came into existence. With that, I hope you found this episode useful, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'd be happy to respond. Till then, take care and trade safe. I'll be back soon with the next one.